Hello, Mark Zuckerberg, and good evening, everybody. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you, I think you all already know him, my friend and fellow translator, Michael Goldman, a resident of Florence, who has been translating Danish literature for about 5 years now, after a successful career as a carpenter and builder. Since then, and this is a truly incredible fact, over 100 of his translations of both poetry and prose have been published. And let me just, as a translator, say that not only is he incredibly prolific, but people actually want to publish it. That's not to produce that much and to get that much published is astounding. And that's in dozens of literary journals such as the Harvard Review, Columbia Journal, Rattle, and the International Poetry Review. Last year, Michael was in this very store to introduce his translations of Danish farming poetry and a novel called Stories About Tacit. This evening, he is unveiling 2 new books. I'm looking at them right now. The first is a poetry book called Average Neuroses and an essay collection called Fragments of a Mirror. Both of these are published by Spuytenduyvil Press. Please enjoy the reading and stay for the refreshments. Welcome, Michael Goldman.
Right. Thank you, Sebastian. Sebastian is also a terrific translator. He translates Yiddish and Esperanto. And thanks to Eileen for hosting us at White Square Books this evening in Easthampton. So I'm going to read a few excerpts and poems from these 2 new books and a couple of poems from a new chapbook of original poetry that I also have. And tell you about some of my interactions with having these books published and answer any questions that you might have at the end. So I'm going to start with a poem from this collection, Balance, that talks a little bit about the importance of art or creativity. This is called Slaves and Robots for Eugene Ionesco. Slaves and robots understand usefulness, cause and effect, life's linear movement towards an aim, increasing efficiency to the logical conclusion where life loses substance and ends before it has begun, which is where art enters with uselessness, pries apart the paralyzed, and into that void inserts sensation, aroma, memory, quickens us against unceasing waves of usefulness which we must ever resist. So the seeds of this first book, Average Neuroses, were sown when I was ending my career as a carpenter. And a memory returned to me recently when I used to have a Denmark sticker on the back of my work van. And I was backing up to this huge garage that we were making very beautiful. And I walked into the garage and a guy who was working there says, "Yo, dude, I saw the sticker on the back of your van. I love the dead Kennedys too." But anyway, I was, when I would go to Denmark anytime, I would pick up as many interesting Danish books as I could, so I would have something to entertain myself through the year. And now, as I started translating, I was also interested in looking for new authors. And I bought this book, it was the best poetry of 1979. So it was already 35 years old when I bought it. And I was reading through it over the winter, and there were it's like 100 different poets in here. Some of them I knew, some of them I didn't. And there were 3 poems that just blew me away. That it was a voice unlike any I'd ever read. It was so direct and funny and deep at the same time, and relevant. And I thought, who is this person? Let me read. I'll read one for you. There were 3 in here. There was one about friendship. That's this one. And there was one about marriage, and another one about work. This one is called Leor. I'll read it in Danish first, and then I'll just a little bit so you can hear the language, and I'll read the whole thing in English. Leor. Bare jeg aldrig havde sagt til Gudrun, at havet ikke kan udstå lever. Jeg tænkte slet ikke over det. Det røg bare lige ud af munden på mig, da vi talte om, hvor svært det er at finde på noget, når ens mand er så kredsen. Og jeg kunne have bidt tungen af mig selv, da jeg kom i tanke om, at vi jo fik lære os sidst, vi var ude til middag hos dem. Hun tror garanteret, jeg sagde det, bare for at fornærme hende. Ganske vist virker hun ikke spor sur, da hun gik. Tværtimod, hun sagde, hils Harald og ungerne, og vi ringes ved om den teateraften. Men derfor kan hun jo godt være sur, og måske bare ikke vise det. So I'll read it in English. Liver. If only I hadn't said to Gertrude that Harold couldn't stand liver. I didn't think about it at all. I just blurted it out when we were talking about how hard it is to think of something when your husband is so picky. And I could have bitten my tongue right off when I realized that, of course, we had liver last time we had dinner at their place. I'm sure she thinks I said that just to insult her. She didn't seem upset at all when she left. On the contrary, she said, tell Harold and the kids I said hi, and we'll call you about going to that show. But she could still be mad and just doesn't want to show it. And now she definitely won't call like she promised. Which reminds me, it's been quite a while since I heard from Lisa. I may have sounded a bit strange the last time she called, but that was because I was sitting wondering if Nina had told Jörn and Beerta what I had said about their new rug, that gray was so practical, as if I were hinting that their place was filthy, or that the old rug wasn't practical, or that the new one wasn't pretty, since I couldn't think of anything positive to say about it other than that gray was practical. And I didn't mean it like that. I think it's a really nice rug. But as a housewife, of course, you consider practicality a lot. I'll have to remember to say something nice about their rug next time we're together with them, if we do ever see them again. But maybe I should call Gertrude and say, sorry about that with the liver. Or is that too dumb just to call about that? Maybe I could call about something else and then like coincidentally mention that, by the way, Harold thought that liver was really great when it was prepared that way in the oven with that incredible sauce. But maybe she's already decided to just forget it. And then she'll get really mad because I keep bringing it back up. Or maybe she's not sure if she can allow herself to feel insulted. Maybe she's not sure whether I even said liver at all. So there's no reason to come right out and call and confirm it. Or it could be that she didn't notice. It's probably best to act like nothing happened. And to be sure to think more carefully in the future when I'm talking with people. If I keep being so dumb, we'll end up not having any friends. So that was Liver by Marianne Koluda Hansen. So I read these through poems and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to translate, I gotta find this person. So I go on the internet and all I can find on some obscure Danish author site is 3 sentences that she had written a couple books in the late 70s, early 80s, and that's it. I can't find anything else about her. And her books are all out of print, her publisher is out of business, and I think, what am I gonna do? So I go on the Danish white pages, and I find one person with this name in Denmark. So I translate the poems, and I send them off saying, I'm a translator, I'd like to translate your work, and I wait. And weeks go by, and I hear nothing. And then I get an email, and I'm Marianne's husband. I'm sorry, but she's in the hospital. And I think, oh, this is great. I found the right person. It's too bad that she's not feeling well, but okay. So I write back and I say, sorry to hear that. What I really need is a letter of permission to allow me to translate these works and try and get them published. And I need her books. I don't know how to get a hold of them. Can you send me her books? So more weeks go by. And eventually I get another email. Sorry it took so long to get back to you, but Marianne died. And but I'm going to send you the letter that you asked for, and I'll send you the books. But it might take me a while. Okay. So more weeks go by, and I get a package which has the letter that I wanted, and a couple of thin books, and a stack of paper, because he couldn't find a copy of one of her books. He had to photocopy the one he had in the house. So she is a forgotten author in Denmark. Yes. And so I start translating the books right away. And I'm having a great time. I love her work. It's just wonderful. So let me read 2 more for you. Maybe I should. So I'm translating them and I'm sending them out, and they're getting picked up to get published right away. Stanford University publishes a couple, Smith College publishes a couple, International Poetry Review publishes a couple. Columbia publishes a couple. Anyway, it's going great, right? So here, this one is called Friday Evening in Acme. Acme is a grocery store. All of them have someone to come home to. I can tell by their shopping carts that are bulging with security, belonging, and well-being. Neck chops on sale, dog food and munchies, weekend candy for the kids, a half-gallon of wine, baking potatoes, giant economy and family packs, diapers and French cheeses, heavy worn-down women with knit caps and striped bags, brand new mothers, bearded men, authoritative wives, and young couples, some without coats, so you can tell there's a car waiting out there. And they all have someone to come home to. And here I come with a pint of low-fat yogurt and half a rye bread, naked, as you only can be Friday evening in Acme. It's embarrassing not being loved, and all of them can see it. They don't believe my husband is just on a trip and the kids with the grandparents for the weekend. I leave the line, grab a couple of steaks, a good bottle of wine, and a large rye bread, 3 pairs of men's socks, a dozen eggs, 2 bags of cookies, 10 condoms, 4 pacifiers, 40 diapers, a half-gallon of milk, a bottle of aftershave, and a pack of frozen unpeeled shrimp. It's going to be expensive. And then I've got to stand in line again. It's totally crazy, but it doesn't matter. Now it's like it's easier to look people in the eye. And one more from this book. I have to read this one because of the time of year. This is called The Lilacs. We have a lilac bush in the corner of our house, and it is blooming right now. This poem has meant a lot to me. We have occasions, all the time in our lives, and it's strange how sometimes the things that we look forward to are also the things that we fear at the same time. The lilacs. I know of nothing worse than when the lilacs are blooming. All year I look forward to it. And if it weren't for the thought of how beautiful the world can be when the lilacs are in flower, I wouldn't make it through the winter's sad darkness and cold. I love lilacs. To me, they are some of the most beautiful things in the world. But as soon as they start to bloom, I feel afraid. Now the time is coming that I've been looking forward to for so many months. And how am I going to enjoy it? Will I be able to get enough out of that beautiful but all too short period when the lilacs are in bloom? I never feel I'm ready. If only they would give me another week. But nature must follow its laws, and the buds open like popcorn whether I'm ready or not. As long as the lilacs are in bloom, I play hooky from work, decline all invitations, barricade myself inside my home with lots of red wine and canned goods and blackout curtains, don't willingly go outside unless it is absolutely unavoidable, and then preferably only after darkness, with bowed head and visor and blinders, dark glasses and wide-brimmed hat, in order not to be confronted with the lilacs shameless putting themselves on display. To avoid inhaling the scent, I hold my breath and breathe only when I know there is no danger, for example, by trash cans, stinking sewers, and fresh dog poop. When I eventually get the feeling it's about over, I carefully leer towards where the lilacs are hanging, and my heart leaps with joy when they are finished, burnt out, brown and limp. Now I can breathe again. Stand up straight and lift my gaze, report healthy to work, open my dark curtains, and start getting together with people again. But next year I will enjoy the lilacs, come out to meet them, and be prepared, so they don't take me by surprise again. I'm not going to let them terrorize me. I love lilacs. To me, they are some of the most beautiful things in the world, and I'm already beginning to look forward to the next time they bloom. So it was going well with these, and I'm going to be in Denmark, in Copenhagen, for a translators conference, so I arranged to meet with her husband. I like to have a personal connection with any author that I'm translating. And so he meets me at the bus, and we walk back to his house, and we sit in the dining room, and we have Danish pastries and tea. And he's telling me about their life together. They got married young, they had a little boy. She worked as an assistant editor at a large publishing house, and then got her certification to teach Danish and English to adults at a school, and that was her career. And she was a very dedicated mother and teacher, had a lot of energy, but he said from the beginning she suffered from emotional downturns as well. And she took medication through the years, which wasn't always helpful, and she just had a lot of ups and downs. And there were some days where she wouldn't show up for work. And as the years progressed, she continued to write, but she would usually destroy whatever she wrote. She actually had a novel that was accepted for publishing, and when they asked her to do some editing, she destroyed it. So that's gone. Yeah. But as her work habits became more uneven, they hired a substitute for her, and then after 30 years, she was fired. At that point, she moved upstairs into their son's old room and never left the house. She smoked 30 cigarettes a day. He's telling me all this at their dining room table, and we're looking at pictures from her readings for when she was a young woman. And he says she had a brain aneurysm followed by 3 strokes, which ended her in the hospital, more or less unable to move and on a respirator because she couldn't breathe on her own either. He said, that's when I got this envelope from the United States, from me, with these translations in it. And after communicating with me, he brought it to the hospital, and he read her the whole thing. The English, the Danish, of course she was very good at English. And he asked her, should I give permission to this guy to do this? And she said yes. So he left the hospital, and he says he found out 15 minutes later their son arrived at the hospital to check on his mother, and walked over to her and asked how she was doing, and she looked up at him and said, a letter came. He'd come. And it so happened those were her last words. She died shortly after that. And when he told me that, I realized that, this was more than just translating a few poems, that this is something that really impacted someone's life. And this book is published it's in Danish and in English, and it's for sale in Denmark as well. So Marianne's poetry transports me to this a place that I don't often visit inside myself, this place of where suffering meets humor, and it's really wonderful how she can do that. I'd like to move on to the other book, which is a book of nonfiction. It's essays, Fragments of a Mirror. And this book transports me to actual places, because he's a real master of mood and setting and description. This is the kind of book that you might be halfway through it and you look up and you think, oh wait, I'm not Danish, I forgot. Because he puts you in that place, in that mindset of what you see and what you feel moving around his country, or in Greenland too. There's a couple essays in here in Greenland. He has this wonderful. He reminds me a lot of E.B. White, if you've read E.B. White's essays, interspersed wonderful philosophical observations with incredible description. The cover is the gate to the Deer Park, which is a huge public park north of Copenhagen, where he lived nearby there, and several of the essays take place in or near this park, which is not only wonderful to walk in, but it's also the home to over 2,000 deer. It was once the royal hunting grounds for the king years ago. I realize his name is almost impossible to say in English. If you have to say his first name, you could rhyme it with smooth. The K and R are both hard, so Knud. Sønderby, I realize is almost impossible, but Knud would be his first name if you want to try that. Let me read a couple of excerpts from here. There's so many wonderful excerpts from these essays. This first one, Denmark is a windy place. It juts out into the North Sea. And so it's a very maritime climate. But if you really want to feel the wind, you go to the west coast of Denmark, because that's where it comes in. And Denmark is a leader in world technology in wind turbines, and they get over 20% of their electricity from windmills. This is from the Wind in Westjylland. There is a painting by Knud Sønderby of a man standing by the North Sea. He's looking out over the water with his hands in his pockets, leaning forward at an angle completely at odds with the law of gravity. Obviously a man who is about to fall, already well on his way down towards the sand. Yet he remains hanging there, held up by the gale. That is how you stand at the North Sea. Turn your head and your hair rises up, swept by the wind like seaweed on the stones. You stand leaning against the gale, under the element's power. You have to guide your breathing so you don't get suffocated by too large a mouthful. Sometimes you hear nothing but the whoosh around yourself. The wind is playing on your body like on an instrument, drumming on your clothing, whistling through your nostrils and earlobes, howling in the corners of your mouth, new instrumental peculiarities at every change of position. And when you have adjusted yourself to the angle that provides a hiatus to the sounds around your person, then all at once you hear the ocean's sinister tone in all its purity reaching you from the surf. Your ear is suddenly out there, in the water, washed over like a shell by every showering wave, swept back and forth in the breakers, polished against the sand and water in the ocean's heavy rhythm. This next one is from A Man and His Great-Grandfather. In this essay, Sønderby was a city person and a kind of intelligentsia. He was one of the founders of the Danish Academy, for example. But he happened to be traveling in rural Denmark, and the name of a village triggered something in the back of his mind, and something a great aunt had said once. And he thought, I think this is where my family is from. So he started knocking on doors, and eventually was led by an old man to a house that was the ancestral home of his forefathers. And he writes, it can happen that a fourth or fifth generation city dweller finds his way back to his place of origin, stands in front of it, looks at the same view that had been his family's for many generations, and the swallows are seesawing on the telephone wires, the wind is whistling, the sheep are grazing between sedges and lime grass, and there are bluebells at the road edge. Time takes care of itself here. You don't have to help the time pass. It just stands still. There I stood, so strangely irrelevant and foreign, like a highly polished piece of furniture from the factory dropped at the roadside. And I don't own that place, which otherwise always was ours. I sat for a half hour looking at that house, which had nothing to do with me anymore, imprinting on my memory the view to all sides. The sheep almost grazed the life right out of me by their ease and sense of belonging. But I did realize a couple of things. I have very ugly hands. They are almost as wide as they are long. They were made to hold an oar, or to work as a livestock dealer, boring my fingers scrutinizingly into the tenderloin of a steer. My hands nearly cover my typewriter, and I often make mistakes. It was as if these hands had come home again. So, as I said, I like to have a personal connection to my authors. Sønderby died the year I was born. But my wife and I were in Denmark, and we were going to be leaving the next day, and we happened to be in the part of town not too far from here. And I knew that he was buried at a church nearby. And I thought, well, I can at least go to his grave and pay my respects. We got a little bit of a late start. And so when we made it to the church, at the end of a dead-end road, there's a iron gate as high as the ceiling, and this tall Gothic stone church in the twilight. And I think, well, it's probably locked. We get out of the car, and it's open. So we slip in. And there's gravestones all around the church, like right up to it, in the churchyard. And I think he's probably got one of these, because he's a pretty well-known writer. He probably has a nice-sized grave. So we're walking up and down the rows. with our cell phones using the lights to read the names on these graves. And there's Jensen and Merlot and Hansen, and we don't see any Sønderby. And we make it all the way around the other side of the church, and we're standing in front of the church, and we're like, well, what do we do now? And it's dark. And we look across the driveway, and there's an outbuilding, which was like bathrooms and landscaping equipment for the churchyard. And there's a guy standing under the light in the corner, talking on a cell phone. So being unabashed American, I walk up to him, and when he's done this call, I say, excuse me, we're visiting from the U.S. We're looking for this particular author. Do you have any idea where he might be buried? And he says, I have no idea, but my wife happens to be the manager of the graveyard. I could call her for you. And I said, that would be great. So he calls her, and they talk, and I'm listening, and he says, she's not really sure, but she thinks there might be a stone with that name in the urn yard. And I say, well, where's the urn yard? And he points over, and there's this huge expanse of lawn in the dark, and there's these medium-sized flat and round stones in the ground. And my wife and I, we look at each other, and we're like, this is impossible. How are we supposed to, there's hundreds of them. How are we supposed to find him in the dark? And she says, yeah, this is probably impossible. Well, let's just use our intuition. Think where you think he might be buried and just walk in that direction. So I walk in one direction and she walks in another direction, and we've got our cell phones down, trying to read the names as we walk along. I make it to the end of the lawn, and I didn't see anything. And I look up, and there's Yetta waving her cell phone like this. So I walk over to her, and don't you know she's standing in front of this stone. And this is it's just a lawn, but I noticed there's a tree, a small to medium-sized tree behind the stone, and I think, is this a hawthorn? His second collection of essays was called The Hawthorns, and don't you know they planted a hawthorn tree behind a stone? And I know it was because I reached out to the tree and I got stuck really bad because they have these long, horrible needles on their bark. And I had an American-Danish friendship pin that I left in the crotch of the tree, and I knelt down and I thanked him for the work that he contributed while he was alive and for the chance to bring it back to life in English. So that was that story. Let me read one more excerpt from here. This is from a really delightful retelling of a horseback ride that he took with a 10-year-old girl. This is called A Ride with a Lady. So they're each on their own horses, and she knows the area, and he doesn't. And she takes him through the woods, and they end up at a gully with a bridge across it. But she knew the bridge was rotted, and that we could risk a hoof going through and a horse breaking a leg. So she turned between the trees and directly towards the gully. Her black Holsteiner gathered itself and stretched, snorting with excitement. A snap of the whip as a farewell to this side, and it flew and landed with its forelegs and rear legs and all its weight in the New World. It sped in between the young trees, cracking the branches on the other side, kicking its back legs skyward in sheer excitement, ready to gallop to the end of the world. She got it turned around and calmed down, and there we were on either side of the gully, and she was waiting for me. Up till then, I had been enthusiastic. The ride had been 10 times better with her along, since we could talk and yell to one another, and she knew all the good places to ride. Otherwise, I would just have ridden straight up and down the road. But now a damper had been put on my excitement. If I had been alone, I would never have made it to this gully. If I had been riding with a man, I could have said, "No, thank you very much. You're not going to find me risking life and limb, hazarding a 2 to 3 yard chasm." But I was not alone, and I was with a young girl. "Well, that was very good," I said with appreciation, as if I had only held my horse back so I could judge her performance. Then I backed my horse up. I gave it an approach as if it were going to jump from the island of Langelen to Toostingen, using both spurs and whip, my whole life breathlessly passing before my eyes, remembering particularly my childhood piousness. I stormed towards the gully, which gaped like an open mass grave. Are we jumping or are we not jumping? Is the horse coming or am I going alone? But the horse chose to come along, hurtling forward like a tank. I took flight as if by an explosion, and the twigs on the other side whipped me in my ears. Then we stopped, and she, for whom I had risked my limbs, patted the horse and laughed. So I would like to read one more. I'd like to close with one more poem from my chapbook. As you may have read in the paper, the peaches are going to make it this year. We happen to have a peach tree in our backyard, and there was nothing last year because of the frost. But it's nice to see that it's full of blooms. So this is called Maturity. A yellow blushing peach hangs on its tree, taking in the world, drawing juice, slowly transforming the taut young flesh to something sweeter, softer, more delectable. It hangs maturing by coincidence or fate, has avoided pitfalls, frost, disease, pests, to have come this far. One day it will wobble and fall at that moment of total ripeness. That's where I want to be. So at this point, I would open up, if you have any questions, anything that came up that you'd like to ask about while we're still gathered together, this will be the time to do that. Anybody have it? No? Okay.
I was going to applaud.
Okay,
first.
well, that's